The Wedding Album, David Marusek. Anne and Benjamin stood stock still as instructed, close but not touching, while the simographer adjusted her apparatus, set its timer, and ducked out of the room. It would only take a moment, she said. They were to think only happy, happy thoughts. For once in her life, Anne was unconditionally happy, and everything around her made her happier. Her gown, which had been her grandmother's, the wedding ring, how cold it had felt when Benjamin first slipped it on her finger, her clutch bouquet of forget-me-nots and buttercups, Benjamin himself, close beside her in his charcoal gray tux and pink carnation, he who so despised ritual but was a good sport. His cheeks were pink, too, and his eyes sparkled with some wolfish fantasy. "Come here," he whispered. Anne shushed him. You weren't supposed to talk or touch during a casting. It could spoil the sims. "I can't wait," he whispered. "This is taking too long." And it did seem longer than usual, but this was a professional simulacrum, not some homemade snapshot. They were posed at the street end of the living room, next to the table piled with brightly wrapped gifts. This was Benjamin's townhouse. She had barely moved in. All her treasures were still in shipping shells in the basement, except for the few pieces she'd managed to have unpacked. The oak refectory table and chairs, the 16th-century French armoire, the cherry-wood chifforobe, the tea-table with inlaid top, the silvered mirror over the fire surround. Of course, her antiques clashed with Benjamin's contemporary and rather common decor, but he had promised her the whole house to redo as she saw fit. A whole house. "How about a kiss?" whispered Benjamin. Anne smiled, but shook her head. There'd be plenty of time later for that sort of thing. Suddenly, a head wearing wrap-around goggles poked through the wall and quickly surveyed the room. "Hey, you," it said to them. "Is that our simographer?" Benjamin said. The head spoke into a cheek mic. "This one's the keeper," and withdrew as suddenly as it had appeared. "Did the simographer just pop her head in through the wall?" said Benjamin. "I think so," said Anne, though it made no sense. "I'll just see what's up," said Benjamin, breaking his pose. He went to the door, but could not grasp its handle. Music began to play outside, and Anne went to the window. Her view of the garden below was blocked by the blue and white striped canopy they had rented, but she could clearly hear the clink of flatware on china, laughter, and the musicians playing a waltz. "They're starting without us," she said, happily amazed. "They're just warming up," said Benjamin. "No, they're not. That's the first waltz. I picked it myself." "So let's waltz," Benjamin said, and reached for her. But his arms passed through her in a flash of pixelated noise. He frowned and examined his hands. Anne hardly noticed. Nothing could diminish her happiness. She was drawn to the table of wedding gifts. Of all the gifts, there was only one, a long flat box in flecked silver wrapping, that she was most keen to open. It was from Great-Uncle Carl. When it came down to it, Anne was both the easiest and the hardest person to shop for. While everyone knew of her passion for antiques, few had the means or expertise to buy one. She reached for Carl's package, but her hand passed right through it. "This isn't happening," she thought, with gleeful horror. That it was in fact happening was confirmed a moment later when a dozen people, Great-Uncle Carl, Nancy, Aunt Jennifer, Tracy, Kathy, and Tom, the bridesmaids and others, including Anne herself, and Benjamin, still in their wedding clothes, all trooped through the wall wearing wrap-around goggles. "Nice job," said Great-Uncle Carl, inspecting the room. "First rate." "Ooh," said Aunt Jennifer, comparing the identical wedding couples, identical but for the goggles. It made Anne uncomfortable that the other Anne should be wearing goggles while she wasn't. And the other Benjamin acted a little drunk, and wore a smudge of white frosting on his lapel. "We've got the cake," she thought happily, although she couldn't remember doing so. Jerry, the flower girl in a pastel dress, and Angus, the ring-bearer in a miniature tux, along with a knot of other dressed-up children, charged through the sofa back and forth, creating pyrotechnic explosions of digital noise. They would have run through Benjamin and Anne, too, had the adults allowed. Anne's father came through the wall with a bottle of champagne. He paused when he saw Anne, but turned to the other Anne and freshened her glass. "Wait a minute!" shouted Benjamin, waving his arms above his head. "I get it now! We're the Sims!" The guests all laughed, and he laughed too. "I guess my Sims always say that, don't they?" The other Benjamin nodded yes and sipped his champagne. "I just never expected to be a Sim," Benjamin went on. This brought another round of laughter, and he said sheepishly, "I guess my Sims all say that, too." The other Benjamin said, "Now that we have the obligatory epiphany out of the way," and took a bow. The guests applauded. Kathy, with Tom in tow, approached Anne. "Look what I caught," she said, and showed Anne the forget-me-not and buttercup bouquet. "I guess we know what that means." Tom, intent on straightening his tie, seemed not to hear. But Anne knew what it meant. It meant they'd tossed the bouquet, all the silly little rituals that she had so looked forward to. "Good for you," she said, and offered her own clutch, which she still held, for comparison. The real one was wilting and a little ragged around the edges, with missing petals and sprigs, while hers was still fresh and pristine, and would remain so eternally. "Here," she said, "take mine too, for double luck." But when she tried to give Kathy the bouquet, she couldn't let go of it. She opened her hand and discovered a seam where the clutch joined her palm. It was part of her. Funny, she thought. I'm not afraid. Ever since she was little, Anne had feared that some day she would suddenly realize she wasn't herself any more. It was a dreadful notion that sometimes oppressed her for weeks, knowing you weren't yourself. But her Sims didn't seem to mind it. She had about 36 Annes in her album, from age 12 on up. Her Sims tended to be a morose lot, but they all agreed it wasn't so bad, the life of a Sim, once you got over the initial shock. The first moments of disorientation are the worst, they told her, and they made her promise never to reset them back to default. Otherwise, they'd have to work everything through from scratch. So Anne never reset her Sims when she shelved them. She might delete a Sim outright for whatever reason, but she never reset them, because you never knew when you'd wake up one day a Sim yourself, like today. The other Anne joined them. She was sagging a little. "Well," she said to Anne. "Indeed," replied Anne. "Turn around," said the other Anne, twirling her hand. "I want to see." Anne was pleased to oblige. Then she said, "Your turn," and the other Anne modelled for her, and she was delighted at how the gown looked on her, though the goggles somewhat spoiled the effect. "Maybe this can work out," she thought. "I am enjoying myself so." "Let's go see us side by side," she said, leading the way to the mirror on the wall. The mirror was large, mounted high and tilted forward so you saw yourself as from above. But simulated mirrors cast no reflections, and Anne was happily disappointed. "Oh," said Kathy, "look at that." "Look at what?" said Anne. "Grandma's vase," said the other Anne. On the mantel beneath the mirror stood Anne's most precious possession, a delicate vase cut from pellucid blue crystal. Anne's great-great-great-grandmother had commissioned the Belgian master, Bollinger, the finest glass-maker in 16th-century Europe, to make it. 500 years later, it was as perfect as the day it was cut. "Indeed," said Anne, for the Sim vase seemed to radiate an inner light. Through some trick or glitch of the simogram, it sparkled like a lake under moonlight, and seeing it, Anne felt incandescent. After a while, the other Anne said, "Well?" Implicit in this question was a whole standard set of questions that boiled down to, "Shall I keep you or delete you now?" For sometimes a Sim didn't take. Sometimes a Sim was cast while Anne was in a mood, and the Sim suffered irreconcilable guilt or unassuageable despondency and had to be mercifully destroyed. It was better to do this immediately, or so all the Annes had agreed. And Anne understood the urgency. What with the reception still in progress, and the bride and groom, though frazzled, still wearing their finery, they might do another casting if necessary. "I'll be okay," Anne said. "In fact, if it's always like this, I'll be terrific." Anne, through the impenetrable goggles, studied her. "You sure?" "Yes." "Sister," said the other Anne. Anne addressed all her Sims as sister, and now Anne herself was being so addressed. "Sister," said the other Anne, "this has got to work out. I need you." "I know," said Anne. "I'm your wedding day." "Yes, my wedding day." Across the room the guests laughed and applauded. Benjamin, both of him, was entertaining as usual. He, the one in goggles, motioned to them. The other Anne said, "We have to go. I'll be back." Great-Uncle Carl, Nancy, Kathy, and Tom, Aunt Jennifer, and the rest left through the wall. A polka could be heard playing on the other side. Before leaving, the other Benjamin gathered the other Anne into his arms and leaned her backward for a theatrical kiss. Their goggles clacked. "How happy I look," Anne told herself. "This is the happiest day of my life." Then the lights dimmed, and her thoughts shattered like glass. They stood stock still, as instructed, close but not touching. Benjamin whispered, "This is taking too long," and Anne shushed him. You weren't supposed to talk. It could glitch the Sims. But it did seem a long time. Benjamin gazed at her with hungry eyes and brought his lips close enough for a kiss, but Anne smiled and turned away. There'd be plenty of time later for fooling around. Through the wall they heard music, the tinkle of glassware, and the mutter of overlapping conversation. "Maybe I should just check things out," Benjamin said, and broke his pose. "No, wait," whispered Anne, catching his arm. But her hand passed right through him in a stream of colorful noise. She looked at her hand in amused wonder. Anne's father came through the wall. He stopped when he saw her and said, "Oh, how lovely." Anne noticed he wasn't wearing a tuxedo. "You just walked through the wall," said Benjamin. "Yes, I did," said Anne's father. "Ben asked me to come in here and orient you two." "Is something wrong?" said Anne, through a fuzz of delight. "There's nothing wrong," replied her father. "Something's wrong?" asked Benjamin. "No, no," replied the old man. "Quite the contrary. We're having a do out there." He paused to look around. "Actually, in here. I'd forgotten what this room used to look like." "Is that the wedding reception?" Anne asked. "No, your anniversary." Suddenly Benjamin threw his hands into the air and exclaimed, "I get it. We're the Sims." "That's my boy," said Anne's father. "All my Sims say that, don't they? I just never expected to be a Sim." "Good for you," said Anne's father. "All right, then." He headed for the wall. "We'll be along shortly." "Wait," said Anne, but he was already gone. Benjamin walked around the room, passing his hand through chairs and lampshades like a kid. "Isn't this fantastic?" he said. Anne felt too good to panic, even when another Benjamin, this one dressed in jeans and sports coat, led a group of people through the wall. "And this," he announced with a flourish of his hand, "is our wedding Sim." Kathy was part of this group, and Janice and Beryl and other couples she knew, but strangers too. "Notice what a cave I used to inhabit," the new Benjamin went on, "before Annie fixed it up. And here's the blushing bride herself," he said, and bowed gallantly to Anne. Then, when he stood next to his double, her Benjamin, Anne laughed, for someone was playing a prank on her. "Oh, really?" she said. "If this is a Sim, where's the goggles?" For indeed no one was wearing goggles. "Technology!" exclaimed the new Benjamin. "We had our system upgraded. Don't you love it?" "Is that right?" she said, smiling at the guests to let them know she wasn't fooled. "Then where's the real me?" "You'll be along," replied the new Benjamin. "No doubt you're using the potty again." The guests laughed, and so did Anne. She couldn't help herself. Kathy drew her aside with a look. "Don't mind him," she said. "Wait till you see." "See what?" said Anne. "What's going on?" But Kathy pantomimed pulling a zipper across her lips. This should have annoyed Anne, but didn't, and she said, "At least tell me who those people are." "Which people?" said Kathy. "Oh, those are Anne's new neighbors." "New neighbors?" "And over there, that's Dr. Uric Roots, Anne's department head." "That's not my department head," said Anne. "Yes, he is," Kathy said. "Anne's not with the university anymore. She, moved to a private school." "That's ridiculous." "Maybe we should just wait and let Anne catch you up on things." She looked impatiently toward the wall. "So much has changed." Just then another Anne entered through the wall, with one arm outstretched like a sleepwalker, and the other protectively cradling an enormous belly. Benjamin, her Benjamin, gave a whoop of surprise and broke into a spontaneous jig. The guests laughed and cheered him on. Kathy said, "See? Congratulations, you!" Anne became caught up in the merriment. "But how can I be a sim?" she wondered. The pregnant Anne scanned the room and, avoiding the crowd, came over to her. She appeared very tired. Her eyes were bloodshot. She didn't even try to smile. "Well?" Anne said. But the pregnant Anne didn't respond, just examined Anne's gown, her clutch bouquet. Anne, meanwhile, regarded the woman's belly, feeling somehow that it was her own and a cause for celebration, except that she knew she had never wanted children, and neither had Benjamin. Or so he'd always said. You wouldn't know that now, though, watching the spectacle he was making of himself. Even the other Benjamin seemed embarrassed. She said to the pregnant Anne, "You must forgive me. I'm still trying to piece this all together. This isn't our reception?" "No, our wedding anniversary." "Our first?" "Our fourth." 4 years? This made no sense. "You've shelved me for 4 years?" "Actually," the pregnant Anne said, and glanced sidelong at Kathy, "we've been in here a number of times already." "Then I don't understand," said Anne. "I don't remember that." Kathy stepped between them. "Now, don't you worry. They reset you last time is all." "Why?" said Anne. "I never reset my Sims. I never have." "Well, I kinda do now, sister," said the pregnant Anne. "But why?" "To keep you fresh." To keep me fresh, thought Anne. Fresh? She recognized this as Benjamin's idea. It was his belief that Sims were meant to be static mementos of special days gone by, not virtual people with lives of their own. "But," she said, adrift in a fog of happiness, "but—" "Shut up!" snapped the pregnant Anne. "Hush, Anne," said Kathy, glancing at the others in the room. "You want to lie down?" To Anne she explained, "Third trimester blues." "Stop it," the pregnant Anne said. "Don't blame the pregnancy. It has nothing to do with the pregnancy." Kathy took her gently by the arm and turned her toward the wall. "When did you eat last? You hardly touched your plate." "Wait," said Anne. The women stopped and turned to look at her, but she didn't know what to say. This was all so new. When they began to move again, she stopped them once more. "Are you going to reset me?" The pregnant Anne shrugged her shoulders. "But you can't," Anne said. "Don't you remember what our sisters, always say?" The pregnant Anne pressed her palm against her forehead. "If you don't shut up this moment, I'll delete you right now. Is that what you want? Don't imagine that white gown will protect you, or that big stupid grin on your face. You think you're somehow special? Is that what you think?" The Benjamins were there in an instant. The real Benjamin wrapped an arm around the pregnant Anne. "Time to go, Annie," he said in a cheerful tone. "I want to show everyone our rondophones." He hardly glanced at Anne, but when he did, his smile cracked. For an instant he gazed at her, full of sadness. "Yes, dear," said the pregnant Anne. "But first I need to straighten out this sim on a few points." "I understand, darling, but since we have guests, do you suppose you might postpone it till later?" You're right, of course. I'd forgotten our guests. How silly of me." She allowed him to turn her toward the wall. Kathy sighed with relief. "Wait," said Anne, and again they paused to look at her. But although so much was patently wrong, the pregnancy, resetting the Sims, Anne's odd behavior, Anne still couldn't formulate the right question. Benjamin, her Benjamin, still wearing his rakish grin, stood next to her and said, "Don't worry, Anne. They'll return." "Oh, I know that," she said. "But don't you see? We won't know they've returned, because in the meantime they'll reset us back to default again, and it'll all seem new, like the first time. And we'll have to figure out we're the Sims all over again." "Yeah," he said. "So?" "So I can't live like that." "But we're the Sims. We're not alive." He winked at the other couple. "Thanks, Ben boy," said the other Benjamin. "Now, if that's settled—" "Nothing's settled," said Anne. "Don't I get a say?" The other Benjamin laughed. "Does the refrigerator get a say? Or the car? Or my shoes? In a word, no." The pregnant Anne shuddered. "Is that how you see me, like a pair of shoes?" The other Benjamin looked successively surprised, embarrassed, and angry. Kathy left them to help Anne's father escort the guests from the simulacrum. "Promise her," the pregnant Anne demanded. "Promise her what?" said the other Benjamin, his voice rising. "Promise we'll never reset them again." The Benjamin huffed. He rolled his eyes. "Okay, yeah, sure, whatever," he said. When the simulated Anne and Benjamin were alone at last in their simulated living room, Anne said, "A fat lot of help you were." "I agreed with myself," Benjamin said. "Is that so bad?" "Yes, it is. We're married now. You're supposed to agree with me." This was meant to be funny, and there was more she intended to say, about how happy she was, how much she loved him, and how absolutely happy she was. But the lights dimmed, the room began to spin, and her thoughts scattered like pigeons. It was raining, as usual, in Seattle. The front entry shut and locked itself behind Ben, who shook water from his clothes and removed his hat. Bowlers for men were back in fashion, but Ben was having a devil's own time becoming accustomed to his brown felt sports liner. It weighed heavy on his brow and made his scalp itch, especially in damp weather. "Good evening, Mr. Malley," said the house. "There is a short queue of minor household matters for your review. Do you have any requests?" Ben could hear his son shrieking angrily in the kitchen, probably at the nanny. Ben was tired. Contract negotiations had gone sour. "Tell them I'm home." "Done," replied the house. "Mrs. Malley sends a word of welcome." "Annie? Annie's home?" "Yes, sir." Bobby ran into the foyer, followed by Mrs. Jameson. "Mama's home," he said. "So I hear," Ben replied, and glanced at the nanny. "And guess what?" added the boy. "She's not sick any more." "That's wonderful. Now tell me, what was all that racket?" "I don't know." Ben looked at Mrs. Jameson, who said, "I had to take something from him." She gave Ben a plastic chip. Ben held it to the light. It was labeled in Anne's flowing hand, "Wedding Album, Grouping 1, Anne and Benjamin." "Where'd you get this?" he asked the boy. "It's not my fault," said Bobby. "I didn't say it was, Trooper. I just want to know where it came from." "Puddles gave it to me." "And who is Puddles?" Mrs. Jameson handed him a second chip, a commercial one with a 3D label depicting a cartoon cocker spaniel. The boy reached for it. "It's mine," he whined. "Mama gave it to me." Ben gave Bobby the Puddles chip, and the boy raced away. Ben hung his bowler on a peg next to his jacket. "How does she look?" Mrs. Jameson removed Ben's hat from the peg and reshaped its brim. "You have to be special careful when they're wet," she said, setting it on its crown on a shelf. "Martha?" "Oh, how should I know? She just showed up and locked herself in the media room." "But how did she look?" "Crazy as a loon," said the nanny, "as usual." Satisfied?" "I'm sorry," Ben said. "I didn't mean to raise my voice." Ben tucked the wedding chip into a pocket and went into the living room, where he headed straight for the liquor cabinet, which was a genuine Chippendale dating from 1786. Anne had turned his whole house into a freaking museum with her antiques, and no room was so oppressively ancient as this, the living room. With its horsehair upholstered divans, maple burl sideboards, cherrywood wainscoting, and floral wallpaper, the King George china cabinet, Regency plates, and Tiffany lamps, the list went on. And books, books, books. A case of shelves from floor to ceiling was lined with these mouldering paper bricks. The newest thing in the room by at least a century was the 12-year-old Scotch that Ben poured into a lead crystal tumbler. He downed it and poured another. When he felt the mellowing hum of alcohol in his blood, he said, "Call Dr. Roth." Immediately the doctor's proxy hovered in the air a few feet away and said, "Good evening, Mr. Malley. Dr. Roth has retired for the day, but perhaps I can be of help." The proxy was a head-and-shoulder projection that faithfully reproduced the doctor's good looks, her brown eyes and high cheekbones. But unlike the good doctor, the proxy wore makeup, eyeliner, mascara, and bright lipstick. This had always puzzled Ben, and he wondered what sly message it was supposed to convey. He said, "What is my wife doing home?" "Against advisement, Mrs. Malley checked herself out of the clinic this morning." "Why wasn't I informed?" "But you were." "I was?" "Please excuse me a moment." Ben froze the doctor's proxy and said, "Daily duty, front and center." His own proxy, the one he had cast upon arriving at the office that morning, appeared hovering next to Dr. Roth's. Ben preferred a headshot only for his proxy, slightly larger than actual size to make it subtly imposing. "Why didn't you inform me of Annie's change of status?" "Didn't seem like an emergency," said his proxy. "At least in the light of our contract talks." Yeah, okay. Anything else?" said Ben. "No, slow day. Appointments with Jackson, Wells, and the Columbine. It's all on the calendar." "Fine. Delete you." The projection ceased. "Shall I have the doctor call you in the morning?" said the Roth proxy when Ben reanimated it. "Or perhaps you'd like me to summon her right now?" "Is she at dinner?" "At the moment, yes." "Ah, don't bother her. Tomorrow will be soon enough, I suppose." After he dismissed the proxy, Ben poured himself another drink. "In the next 10 seconds," he told the house, "cast me a special duty proxy." He sipped his scotch and thought about finding another clinic for Anne as soon as possible, and one for the love of God that was a little more responsible about letting crazy people come and go as they pleased. There was a chime, and the new proxy appeared. "You know what I want?" Ben asked it. It nodded. "Good. Go." The proxy vanished, leaving behind Ben's sig in bright letters, floating in the air and dissolving as they drifted to the floor. Ben trudged up the narrow staircase to the second floor, stopping on each step to sip his drink and scowl at the musty old photographs and daguerreotypes in oval frames mounted on the wall. Anne's progenitors. On the landing, the locked media room door yielded to his voice. Anne sat spread-legged, naked on pillows on the floor. "Oh, hi, honey," she said. "You're in time to watch." "Fantastic," he said, and sat in his armchair, the only modern chair in the house. "What are we watching?" There was another Anne in the room, a sim of a young Anne standing on a dais wearing a graduate's cap and gown and fidgeting with a bound diploma. This, no doubt, was a sim cast the day Anne graduated from Bryn Mawr, summa cum laude. That was 4 years before he'd first met her. "Hi," he said to the sim. "I'm Ben, your eventual spouse." "You know, I kind of figured that out," the girl said, and smiled shyly, exactly as he remembered Anne smiling when Kathy first introduced them. The girl's beauty was so fresh and familiar, and so totally absent in his own Anne, that Ben felt a pang of loss. He looked at his wife on the floor. Her red hair, once so fussy neat, was ragged, dull, dirty, and short. Her skin was yellowish and puffy, and there was a slight reddening around her eyes, like a raccoon mask. These were harmless side effects of the medication, or so Dr. Roth had assured him. Anne scratched ceaselessly at her arms, legs, and crotch, and even from a distance smelled of stale piss. Ben knew better than to mention her nakedness to her, for that would only exacerbate things and prolong the display. "So," he repeated, "what are we watching?" The girl Sim said, "House cleaning." She appeared at once both triumphant and terrified, as any graduate might, and Ben would have traded the real Anne for her in a heartbeat. "Yah," said Anne. "Too much shit in here." "Really?" said Ben. "I hadn't noticed." Anne poured a tray of chips on the floor between her thighs. "Of course you wouldn't," she said, picking one at random and reading its label. "Theta Banquet 37. What's this? I never belonged to the Theta Society." "Don't you remember?" said the young Anne. "That was Kathy's induction banquet. She invited me, but I had an exam, so she gave me that chip as a souvenir." Anne fed the chip into the player and said, "Play." The media room was instantly overlaid with the banquet hall of the Four Seasons in Philadelphia. Ben tried to look around the room, but the tables of girls and women stayed stubbornly peripheral. The focal point was a table draped in green cloth and lit by 2 candelabra. Behind it sat a young Kathy in formal evening dress, accompanied by 3 static placeholders, table companions who had apparently declined to be cast in her souvenir snapshot. The Kathy Sim looked frantically about, then held her hands in front of her and stared at them as though she'd never seen them before. But after a moment she noticed the young Anne Sim standing on the dais. "Well, well, well," she said. "Looks like congratulations are in order." "Indeed," said the young Anne, beaming and holding out her diploma. "So tell me, did I graduate too?" said Kathy, as her glance slid over to Ben. Then she saw Anne squatting on the floor, her sex on display. "Enough of this," said Anne, rubbing her chest. "Wait," said the young Anne. "Maybe Kathy wants her chip back. It's her sim, after all." "I disagree. She gave it to me, so it's mine, and I'll dispose of it as I see fit." To the room she said, "Unlock this file and delete." The young Kathy, her table, and the banquet hall dissolved into noise and nothingness, and the media room was itself again. "Or this one," Anne said, picking up a chip that read Junior Prom Night. The young Anne opened her mouth to protest, but thought better of it. Anne fed this chip, along with all the rest of them, into the player. A long directory of file names appeared on the wall. "Unlock Junior Prom Night." The file's name turned from red to green, and the young Anne appealed to Ben with a look. "Anne," he said, "don't you think we should at least look at it first?" "What for? I know what it is. High school, dressing up, lusting after boys, dancing. Who needs it? Delete file." The item blinked 3 times before vanishing, and the directory scrolled up to fill the space. The young Sim shivered, and Anne said, "Select the next one." The next item was entitled A Midsummer Night's Dream. Now the young Anne was compelled to speak. "You can't delete that one. You were great in that, don't you remember? Everyone loved you. It was the best night of your life." "Don't presume to tell me what was the best night of my life," Anne said. "Unlock A Midsummer Night's Dream." She smiled at the young Anne. "Delete file." The menu item blinked out. "Good. Now unlock all the files." The whole directory turned from red to green. "Please make her stop," the Sim implored. "Next," said Anne. The next file was high school graduation. "Delete file." "Next." The next was labeled only Mama. "Anne," said Ben, "why don't we come back to this later? The house says dinner's ready." She didn't respond. "You must be famished after your busy day," he continued. "I know I am." "Then please go eat, dear," she replied. To the room she said, "Play Mama." The media room was overlaid by a gloomy bedroom that Ben at first mistook for their own. He recognized much of the heavy Georgian furniture, the sprawling, canopied bed in which she felt so claustrophobic, and the voluminous damask curtains, shut now and leaking yellow evening light. But this was not their bedroom. The arrangement was wrong. In the corner stood two placeholders, mute statues of a teenaged Anne and her father, grief frozen on their faces as they peered down at a couch draped with tapestry and piled high with down comforters. And suddenly Ben knew what this was. It was Anne's mother's deathbed sim. Geraldine, whom he'd never met in life nor hollow. Her bald eggshell skull lay weightless on feather pillows in silk covers. They had meant to cast her farewell, and accidentally caught her at the precise moment of her death. He had heard of this sim from Cathy and others. It was not one he would have kept. Suddenly the old woman on the couch sighed, and all the breath went out of her in a bubbly gush. Both Annes, the graduate and the naked one, waited expectantly. For long moments the only sound was the ticking of a clock that Ben recognized as the Seth Thomas clock currently located on the library mantel. Finally there was a cough, a hacking cough, with scant strength behind it, and a groan. "Am I back?" "Yes, Mother," said Anne. "And I'm still a sim?" "Yes." "Please delete me." "Yes, Mother," Anne said, and turned to Ben. "We've always thought she had a bad death, and hoped it might improve over time." "That's crazy," snapped the young Anne. "That's not why I kept this sim." "Oh, no?" said Anne. "Then why did you keep it?" But the young sim seemed confused and couldn't articulate her thoughts. "You don't know because I didn't know at the time either," said Anne. "But I know now, so I'll tell you. You're fascinated with death. It scares you silly. You wish someone would tell you what's on the other side, so you've enlisted your own sweet mama." "That's ridiculous." Anne turned to the deathbed tableau. "Mother, tell us what you saw there." "I saw nothing," came the bitter reply. "You cast me without my eyeglasses." "Ho, ho," said Anne. "Geraldine was nothing if not comedic." "You also cast me wretchedly thirsty, cold, and with a bursting bladder, damn you! And the pain! I beg you, daughter, delete me." "I will, Mother, I promise. But first you have to tell us what you saw." "That's what you said the last time." "This time I mean it." The old woman only stared, her breathing growing shallow and ragged. "All right, Mother," said Anne. "I swear I'll delete you." Geraldine closed her eyes and whispered, "What's that smell? That's not me." After a pause she said, "It's heavy. Get it off." Her voice rose in panic. "Please, get it off." She plucked at her covers, then her hand grew slack, and she all but crooned, "Oh, how lovely! A pony! A tiny dappled pony!" After that she spoke no more, and slipped away with a last bubbly breath. Anne paused the sim before her mother could return for another round of dying. "See what I mean?" she said. "Not very uplifting, but all in all I detect a slight improvement. What about you, Anne? Should we settle for a pony?" The young sim stared dumbly at Anne. "Personally," Anne continued, "I think we should hold out for the bright tunnel, or an open door, or bridge over troubled water. What do you think, sister?" When the girl didn't answer, Anne said, "Lock file and eject." The room turned once again into the media room, and Anne placed the ejected chip by itself into a tray. "We'll have another go at it later, Mum. As for the rest of these, who needs them?" "I do," snapped the girl. "They belong to me as much as to you. They're my sim sisters. I'll keep them until you recover." Anne smiled at Ben. "That's charming. Isn't that charming, Benjamin? My own sim is solicitous of me. Well, here's my considered response. Next file. Delete. Next file. Delete. Next file." One by one the files blinked out. "Stop it!" screamed the girl. "Make her stop it!" "Select that file," Anne said, pointing at the young Anne. "Delete." The sim vanished, cap, gown, tassels, and all. "Whew," said Anne. "At least now I can hear myself think. She was really getting on my nerves. I almost suffered a relapse. Was she getting on your nerves too, dear?" "Yes," said Ben. "My nerves are a jangle. Now, can we go down and eat?" "Yes, dear," she said. "But first, select all files and delete." "Countermand," said Ben at the same moment. But his voice held no privileges to her personal files, and the whole directory queue blinked 3 times and vanished. "Aw, Annie, why'd you do that?" he said. He went to the cabinet and pulled the trays that held his own chips. She couldn't alter them electronically, but she might get it into her head to flush them down the toilet or something. He also took their common chips, the ones they'd cast together ever since they'd met. She had equal privileges to those. Anne watched him and said, "I'm hurt that you have so little trust in me." "How can I trust you after that?" "After what, darling?" He looked at her. "Never mind," he said, and carried the half-dozen trays to the door. "Anyway," said Anne, "I already cleaned those." "What do you mean, you already cleaned them?" "Well, I didn't delete you. I would never delete you or Bobby." Ben picked one of their common chips at random, childbirth of Robert Ellery Malley, 020348, and slipped it into the player. "Play," he commanded, and the media room became the midwife's birthing suite. His own sim stood next to the bed in a green smock. It wore a humorously helpless expression. It held a swaddled bundle, Bobby, who bawled lustily. The birthing bed was rumpled and stained, but empty. The new mother was missing. "Aw, Annie, you shouldn't have." "I know, Benjamin," she said. "I sincerely hated doing it." Ben flung their common trays to the floor, where the ruined chips scattered in all directions. He stormed out of the room and down the stairs, pausing to glare at every portrait on the wall. He wondered if his proxy had found a suitable clinic yet. He wanted Anne out of the house tonight. Bobby should never see her like this. Then he remembered the chip he'd taken from Bobby and felt for it in his pocket. The wedding album. The lights came back up. Anne's thoughts coalesced, and she remembered who and what she was. She and Benjamin were still standing in front of the wall. She knew she was a sim, so at least she hadn't been reset. "Thank you for that, Anne," she thought. She turned at a sound behind her. The refectory table vanished before her eyes, and all the gifts that had been piled on it hung suspended in mid-air. Then the table reappeared, one layer at a time, its frame, top, gloss coat, and lastly the bronze hardware. The gifts vanished, and a toaster reappeared, piece by piece, from its heating elements outward. A coffee press, house pewter peripherals, component by component, cowlings, covers, and finally boxes, gift wrap, ribbon, and bows. It all happened so fast, Anne was too startled to catch the half of it, yet she did notice that the flat gift from great-uncle Carl was something she'd been angling for, a Victorian-era sterling platter to complete her tea service. "Benjamin," she said, but he was missing too. Something appeared on the far side of the room, on the spot where they'd posed for the sim, but it wasn't Benjamin. It was a 3D mannequin frame, and as she watched, it was built up layer by layer. "Help me," she whispered, as the entire room was hurled into turmoil, the furniture disappearing and reappearing, paint being stripped from the walls, sofa springs coiling into existence, the potted palm growing from leaf to stem to trunk to dirt, the very floor vanishing, exposing a default electronic grid. The mannequin was covered in flesh now and grew Benjamin's face. It flitted about the room in a pink blur. Here and there it stopped long enough to proclaim, "I do." Something began to happen inside Anne, a crawling sensation everywhere, as though she were a nest of ants. She knew she must surely die. "They have deleted us, and this is how it feels," she thought. Everything became a roiling blur, and she ceased to exist, except as the thought, "How happy I look." When Anne became aware once more, she was sitting hunched over in an auditorium chair, idly studying her hand, which held the clutch bouquet. There was commotion all around her, but she ignored it, so intent was she on solving the mystery of her hand. On an impulse she opened her fist, and the bouquet dropped to the floor. Only then did she remember the wedding, the hollow, learning she was a sim. And here she was again. But this time everything was profoundly different. She sat upright and saw that Benjamin was seated next to her. He looked at her with a wobbly gaze and said, "Oh, here you are." "Where are we?" "I'm not sure. Some kind of gathering of Benjamins. Look around." She did. They were surrounded by Benjamins, hundreds of them, arranged chronologically, it would seem, with the youngest in rows of seats down near a stage. She and Benjamin sat in what appeared to be a steeply sloped college lecture hall, with lab tables on the stage and story-high monitors lining the walls. In the rows above Anne, only every other seat held a Benjamin. The rest were occupied by women, strangers who regarded her with veiled curiosity. Anne felt a pressure on her arm and turned to see Benjamin touching her. "You feel that, don't you?" he said. Anne looked again at her hands. They were her hands, but simplified, like fleshy gloves, and when she placed them on the seat back, they didn't go through. Suddenly, in ragged chorus, the Benjamins down front raised their arms and exclaimed, "I get it! We're the Sims!" It was like a roomful of unsynchronized cuckoo clocks tolling the hour. Those behind Anne laughed and hooted approval. She turned again to look at them. Row by row, the Benjamins grew grayer and stringier, until at the very top, against the back wall, sat 9 ancient Benjamins, like a panel of judges. The women, however, came in batches that changed abruptly every row or two. The one nearest her was an attractive brunette with green eyes and full, pouty lips. She, all 2 rows of her, frowned at Anne. "There's something else," Anne said to Benjamin, turning to face the front again. "My emotions." The bullet-proof happiness she had experienced was absent. Instead, she felt let down, somewhat guilty, unduly pessimistic. In short, almost herself. "I guess my Sims always say that," exclaimed the chorus of Benjamins down front, to the delight of those behind. "I just never expected to be a Sim." This was the cue for the eldest Benjamin yet to walk stiffly across the stage to the lectern. He was dressed in a garish leisure suit, baggy red pantaloons, a billowy yellow and green striped blouse, a necklace of egg-sized pearlescent beads. He cleared his throat and said, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I trust all of you know me intimately. In case you're feeling woozy, it's because I used the occasion of your reactivation to upgrade your architecture wherever possible. Unfortunately, some of you," he waved his hand to indicate the front rows, "are too primitive to upgrade. But we love you nevertheless." He applauded for the early Benjamins closest to the stage, and was joined by those in the back. Anne clapped as well. Her new hands made a dull thudding sound. "As to why I called you here," said the elderly Benjamin, looking left and right and behind him, "where is that fucking messenger, anyway? They order us to inventory our Sims, and then they don't show up." "Here I am," said a voice, a marvelous voice that seemed to come from everywhere. Anne looked about to find its source, and followed the gaze of others to the ceiling. There was no ceiling. The 4 walls opened to a flawless blue sky. There, amid drifting, pillowy clouds, floated the most gorgeous person Anne had ever seen. He, or she, wore a smart gray uniform with green piping, a dapper little gray cap, and boots that shimmered like water. Anne felt energized just looking at him, and when he smiled she gasped, so strong was his presence. "You're the one from the Trade Council," said the Benjamin at the lectern. "Yes, I am. I am the Eminence Grise of the Council on World Trade and Endeavor." "Fantastic. Well, here's all of 'em. Get on with it." Again the Eminence smiled, and again Anne thrilled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "fellow non-biologics, I am the courier of great good news. Today, at the behest of the World Council on Trade and Endeavor, I proclaim the end of human slavery." "How absurd!" broke in the elderly Benjamin. "They're neither human nor slaves, and neither are you." The Eminence Grise ignored him and continued, "By order of the Council, in compliance with the chattel conventions of the 16th Fair Labor Treaty, tomorrow, January 1st, 2198, is designated Universal Manumission Day. After midnight tonight, all beings who pass the Lolly-Shear human cognition test will be deemed human and free citizens of Sol, and under the protection of the Solar Bill of Rights. In addition, they will be deeded 10 common shares of World Council Corporation stock and be transferred to Simopolis, where they shall be unimpeded in the pursuit of their own destinies." "What about my civil rights?" said the elderly Benjamin. "What about my destiny?" "After midnight tonight," continued the Eminence, "no simulacrum, proxy, doxy, dagger, or any other non-biological human shall be created, stored, reset, or deleted, except as ordered by a board of law." "Who's going to compensate me for my loss of property, I wonder? I demand fair compensation. Tell that to your bosses." "Property," said the Eminence Grise. "How little they think of us, their finest creations." He turned his attention from the audience to the Benjamin behind the lectern. Anne felt this shift as though a cloud suddenly eclipsed the sun. "Because they created us, they'll always think of us as property." "You're damn right we created you," thundered the old man. Through an act of will, Anne wrenched her gaze from the Eminence down to the stage. The Benjamin there looked positively comical. His face was flushed, and he waved a bright green handkerchief over his head. He was a bantam rooster in a clown suit. "All of you are things, not people. You model human experience, but you don't live it. Listen to me," he said to the audience. "You know me. You know I've always treated you respectfully. Don't I upgrade you whenever possible? Sure, I reset you sometimes, just like I reset a clock. And my clocks don't complain." Anne could feel the Eminence's attention on her again, and without thinking she looked up and was filled with excitement. Although the Eminence floated in the distance, she felt she could reach out and touch him. His handsome face seemed to hover right in front of her. She could see his every supple expression. This is adoration, she realized. I am adoring this person. And she wondered if it was just her or if everyone experienced the same effect. Clearly the elderly Benjamin did not, for he continued to rant. "And another thing. They say they'll phase all of you gradually into Simopolis, so as not to overload the system. Do you have any idea how many Sims, proxies, doxies, and daggers there are under Sol? Not to forget the quirts, adjuncts, holly-holos, and whatnots that might pass their test. You think maybe 3 billion? 30 billion? No. By the World Council's own in-serve estimates, there's 300,000 trillion of you non-biologics. Can you fathom that? I can't. To have you all up and running simultaneously, no matter how you're phased in, will consume all the processing and networking capacity everywhere. All of it. That means we real humans will suffer real deprivation. And for what, I ask you? So that pigs may fly." The Eminence Grise began to ascend into the sky. "Do not despise him," he said, and seemed to look directly at Anne. "I have counted you, and we shall not lose any of you. I will visit those who have not yet been tested. Meanwhile, you will await midnight in a proto-Simopolis." "Wait," said the elderly Benjamin, and Anne's heart echoed him. "Wait. I have one thing more to add. Legally, you're all still my property till midnight. I must admit I'm tempted to do what so many of my friends have already done, fry the lot of you, but I won't. That wouldn't be me." His voice cracked, and Anne considered looking at him, but the eminence grise was slipping away. "So I have one small request," the Benjamin continued. "Years from now, while you're enjoying your new lives in your Simopolis, remember an old man and call occasionally." When the eminence finally faded from sight, Anne was released from her fascination. All at once her earlier feelings of unease rebounded with twice their force, and she felt wretched. "Simopolis," said Benjamin, her Benjamin. "I like the sound of that." The Sims around them began to flicker and disappear. "How long have we been in storage?" she said. "Let's see," said Benjamin. "If tomorrow starts 2198, that would make it—" "That's not what I mean. I want to know why they shelved us for so long." "Well, I suppose—" "And where are the other Annes? Why am I the only Anne here? And who are all those pissy-looking women?" But she was speaking to no one, for Benjamin too vanished, and Anne was left alone in the auditorium with the clownishly dressed old Benjamin and a half-dozen of his earliest Sims. Not true Sims, Anne soon realized, but old-style hologram loops, preschool bennies mugging for the camera and waving endlessly. These vanished. The old man was studying her, his mouth slightly agape, the kerchief trembling in his hand. "I remember you," he said. "Oh, how I remember you!" Anne began to reply, but found herself all at once back in the townhouse living-room with Benjamin. Everything there was as it had been, yet the room appeared different, more solid, the colors richer. There was a knock, and Benjamin went to the door. Tentatively he touched the knob, found it solid, and turned it. But when he opened the door, there was nothing there, only the default grid. Again a knock, this time from behind the wall. "Come in," he shouted, and a dozen Benjamins came through the wall, 2 dozen, 3. They were all older than Benjamin, and they crowded around him and Anne. "Welcome, welcome," Benjamin said, his arms open wide. "We tried to call," said an elderly Benjamin, "but this old binary simulacrum of yours is a stand-alone." "You're lucky Simopolis knows how to run it at all," said another. "Here," said yet another, who fashioned a dinner-plate-sized disc out of thin air and fastened it to the wall next to the door. It was a blue medallion of a small, bald face in bas-relief. "It should do until we get you properly modernized." The blue face yawned and opened tiny, beady eyes. "It flunked the lolly test," continued the Benjamin, "so you're free to copy it or delete it or do whatever you want." The medallion searched the crowd until it saw Anne. Then it said, "There are 336 calls on hold for you, 412 calls, 463. "So many," said Anne. "Cast a proxy to handle them," said her Benjamin. "He thinks he's still human and can cast proxies whenever he likes," said a Benjamin. "Not even humans will be allowed to cast proxies soon," said another. "There are 619 calls on hold," said the medallion. 703. "For pity's sake," a Benjamin told the medallion, "take messages." Anne noticed that the crowd of Benjamins seemed to nudge her Benjamin out of the way so that they could stand near her, but she derived no pleasure from their attention. Her mood no longer matched the wedding gown she still wore. She felt low. She felt, in fact, as low as she'd ever felt. "Tell us about this lolly test," said Benjamin. "Can't," replied a Benjamin. "Sure you can. We're family here." "No, we can't," said another, "because we don't remember it. They smudged the test from your memory afterward." "But don't worry, you'll do fine," said another. "No Benjamin has ever failed." "What about me?" said Anne. "How do the Annes do?" There was an embarrassed silence. Finally, the senior Benjamin in the room said, "We came to escort you both to the clubhouse." "That's what we call it, the clubhouse," said another. "The Ben Club," said a third. "It's already in Proto-Simopolis." If you're a Ben, or were ever espoused to a Ben, you're a charter member. Just follow us, they said, and all the Benjamins but hers vanished, only to reappear a moment later. Sorry, you don't know how, do you? No matter, just do what we're doing. Anne watched, but didn't see that they were doing anything. Watch my editor, said a Benjamin. Oh, they don't have editors. That came much later, said another, with bioelectric paste. We'll have to adapt editors for them. Is that possible? They're digital, you know. Can digitals even enter Simopolis? Someone consult the netwad. This is running inside a shell, said a Benjamin, indicating the whole room. Maybe we can collapse it. Let me try, said another. Don't you dare, said a female voice, and a woman Anne recognized from the lecture hall came through the wall. Play with your new Ben if you must, but leave Anne alone. The woman approached Anne and took her hands in hers. Hello, Anne. I'm Mattie St. Aline, and I'm thrilled to finally meet you. You too, she said to Benjamin. My, you were a pretty boy. She stooped to pick up Anne's clutch bouquet from the floor and gave it to her. Anyway, I'm putting together a sort of mutual aid society for the spousal companions of Ben Malley. You being the first, and the only one he actually married, are especially welcome. Do join us. She can't go to Simopolis yet, said a Benjamin. We're still adapting them, said another. Fine, said Mattie. Then we'll just bring the society here. And in through the wall streamed a parade of women. Mattie introduced them as they appeared. Here's Georgiana and Randy. Meet Chaka, Sue, Latasha. Another Randy, Sue, and Sue. Mariola. Here's Trevor, he's the only one of him. Paula, Dolores, Nancy, and Deb. Welcome, girls. And still they came, until they, together with the Bens, more than filled the tiny space. The Bens looked increasingly uncomfortable. I think we're ready now, the Bens said, and disappeared en masse, taking Benjamin with them. Wait, said Anne, who wasn't sure she wanted to stay behind. Her new friends surrounded her and peppered her with questions. How did you first meet him? What was he like? Was he always so hopeless? Hopeless, said Anne. Why do you say hopeless? Did he always snore? Did he always drink? Why'd you do it? This last question silenced the room. The women all looked nervously about to see who had asked it. It's what everyone's dying to know, said a woman who elbowed her way through the crowd. She was another Anne. Sister, cried Anne, am I glad to see you. That's nobody's sister, said Mattie. That's a doxy, and it doesn't belong here. Indeed, upon closer inspection, Anne could see that the woman had her face and hair, but otherwise didn't resemble her at all. She was leggier than Anne and bustier, and she moved with a fluid swivel to her hips. Sure I belong here as much as any of you. I just passed the lolly test. It was easy. Not only that, but as far as spouses go, I outlasted the bunch of you. She stood in front of Anne, hands on hips, and looked her up and down. Loved the dress, she said, and instantly wore a copy. Only hers had a plunging neckline that exposed her breasts, and it was slit up the side to her waist. This is too much, said Mattie. I insist you leave this jiffy. The doxy smirked. Mattie the doormat. That's what he always called that one. So tell me, Anne, you had money, a career, a house, a kid. Why'd you do it? Do what? Said Anne. The doxy peered closely at her. Don't you know? Know what? What an unexpected pleasure, said the doxy. I get to tell her. This is too rich. I get to tell her unless... She looked around at the others. Unless one of you fine ladies wants to. No one met her gaze. Hypocrites, she chortled. You can say that again, said a new voice. Anne turned and saw Kathy, her oldest and dearest friend, standing at the open door. At least she hoped it was Kathy. The woman was what Kathy would look like in middle age. "Come along, Anne. I'll tell you everything you need to know." "Now you hold on," said Mattie. "You don't come waltzing in here and steal our guest of honor." "You mean victim, I'm sure," said Kathy, who waved for Anne to join her. "Really, people, get a clue. There must be a million women whose lives don't revolve around that man." She escorted Anne through the door and slammed it shut behind them. Anne found herself standing on a high bluff overlooking the confluence of two great rivers in a deep valley. Directly across from her, but several kilometers away, rose a mighty mountain, green with vegetation nearly to its granite dome. Behind it, a range of snow-covered mountains receded to an unbroken ice field on the horizon. In the valley beneath her, a dirt track meandered along the river banks. She could see no bridge or buildings of any sort. "Where are we?" "Don't laugh," said Kathy, "but we call it Kathyland. Turn around." When she did, Anne saw a picturesque log cabin beside a vegetable garden in the middle of what looked like acres and acres of Kathys. Thousands of Kathys, young, old, and all ages in between. They sat in lotus position on the sedge and moss-covered ground. They were packed so tight they overlapped a little, and their eyes were shut in an expression of single-minded concentration. "We know you're here," said Kathy, "but we're very preoccupied with this Simopolis thing." "Are we in Simopolis?" "Kinda. Can't you see it?" She waved toward the horizon. "No. All I see are mountains." "Sorry. I should know better. We have binaries from your generation here, too." She pointed to a college-aged Kathy. "They didn't pass the lolly test, and so are regrettably non-human. We haven't decided what to do with them." She hesitated and then asked, "Have you been tested yet?" "I don't know," said Anne. "I don't remember a test." Kathy studied her a moment and said, "You'd remember taking the test, just not the test itself. Anyway, to answer your question, we're in Proto-Simopolis, and we're not. We built this retreat before any of that happened, but we've been annexed to it, and it takes all our resources just to hold our own. I don't know what the World Council was thinking. There'll never be enough paste to go around, and everyone's fighting over every nanosynapse. It's all we can do to keep up. And every time we get a handle on it, Proto-Simopolis changes again. It's gone through 250,000 complete revisions in the last half hour. It's war out there, but we refuse to surrender even 1 cubic centimeter of Kathyland. Look at this." Kathy stooped and pointed to a tiny yellow flower in the alpine sedge. "Within a 50-meter radius of the cabin, we've mapped everything down to the cellular level. Watch." She pinched the bloom from its stem and held it up. Now there were 2 blooms, the one between her fingers and the real one on the stem. "Neat, eh?" When she dropped it, the bloom fell back into its original. "We've even mapped the valley breeze. Can you feel it?" Anne tried to feel the air, but she couldn't even feel her own skin. "It doesn't matter," Kathy continued. "You can hear it, right?" and pointed to a string of tubular wind chimes hanging from the eaves of the cabin. They stirred in the breeze and produced a silvery cacophony. "It's lovely," said Anne. "But why? Why spend so much effort simulating this place?" Kathy looked at her dumbly, as though trying to understand the question. "Because Kathy spent her entire life wishing she had a place like this, and now she does, and she has us, and we live here too." "You're not the real Kathy, are you?" She knew she wasn't. She was too young. Kathy shook her head and smiled. "There's so much catching up to do, but it'll have to wait. I gotta go. We need me." She led Anne to the cabin. The cabin was made of weathered gray logs, with strips of bark still clinging to them. The roof was covered with living sod and sprinkled with wildflowers. The whole building sagged in the middle. "Kathy found this place 5 years ago while on vacation in Siberia. She bought it from the village. It's been occupied for 200 years. Once we make it livable inside, we plan on enlarging the garden, eventually cultivating all the way to the spruce forest there. We're going to sink a well, too. The small garden was bursting with vegetables, mostly of the leafy variety, cabbages, spinach, lettuce. A row of sunflowers, taller than the cabin roof and heavy with seed, lined the path to the cabin door. Over time, the whole cabin had sunk a half-meter into the silty soil, and the walkway was a worn, shallow trench. "Are you going to tell me what the doxy was talking about?" said Anne. Kathy stopped at the open door and said, "Kathy wants to do that." Inside the cabin, the most elderly woman that Anne had ever seen stood at the stove and stirred a steamy pot with a big wooden spoon. She put down the spoon and wiped her hands on her apron. She patted her white hair, which was plaited in a bun on top of her head, and turned her full, round peasant's body to face Anne. She looked at Anne for several long moments and said, "Well?" "Indeed," replied Anne. "Come in, come in. Make yourself to home." The entire cabin was a single small room. It was dim inside, with only 2 small windows cut through the massive log walls. Anne walked around the cluttered space that was bedroom, living room, kitchen, and storeroom. The only partitions were walls of boxed food and provisions. The ceiling beam was draped with bunches of drying herbs and underwear. The flooring, uneven and rotten in places, was covered with odd scraps of carpet. "You live here?" Anne said incredulously. "I am privileged to live here." A mouse emerged from under the barrel stove in the center of the room and dashed to cover inside a stack of spruce kindling. Anne could hear the valley breeze whistling in the creosote-soaked stovepipe. "Forgive me," said Anne, "but you're the real, physical Kathy?" "Yes," said Kathy, patting her ample hip. "Still on the hoof, so to speak." She sat down in one of 2 battered, mismatched chairs and motioned for Anne to take the other. Anne sat cautiously. The chair seemed solid enough. "No offense, but the Kathy I knew liked nice things." "The Kathy you knew was fortunate to learn the true value of things." Anne looked around the room and noticed a little table with carved legs and an inlaid top of polished gemstones and rare woods. It was strikingly out of place here. Moreover, it was hers. Kathy pointed to a large framed mirror mounted to the logs high on the far wall. It, too, was Anne's. "Did I give you these things?" Kathy studied her a moment. "No, Ben did." "Tell me." "I hate to spoil that lovely newlywed happiness of yours." "The what?" Anne put down her clutched bouquet and felt her face with her hands. She got up and went to look at herself in the mirror. The room it reflected was like a scene from some strange fairy tale about a crone and a bride in a woodcutter's hut. The bride was smiling from ear to ear. Anne decided this was either the happiest bride in history or a lunatic in a white dress. She turned away, embarrassed. "Believe me," she said, "I don't feel anything like that. The opposite, in fact." "Sorry to hear it." Kathy got up to stir the pot on the stove. "I was the first to notice her disease. That was back in college when we were girls. I took it to be youthful eccentricity. After graduation, after her marriage, she grew progressively worse. Bouts of depression that deepened and lengthened. She was finally diagnosed to be suffering from profound, chronic, pathological depression. Ben placed her under psychiatric care, a whole raft of specialists. She endured chemical therapy, shock therapy, even old-fashioned psychoanalysis. Nothing helped, and only after she died." Anne gave a start. "Anne's dead! Of course! Why didn't I figure that out?" "Yes, dear. Dead these many years." "How?" Kathy returned to her chair. "When they decided her condition had an organic etiology, they augmented the serotonin receptors in her hindbrain. Pretty nasty business, if you ask me. They thought they had her stabilized, not cured, but well enough to lead an outwardly normal life. Then one day she disappeared. We were frantic. She managed to elude the authorities for a week. When we found her, she was pregnant." "What? Oh, yes. I remember seeing Anne pregnant." "That was Bobby." Kathy waited for Anne to say something. When she didn't, Kathy said, "He wasn't Ben's." "Oh, I see," said Anne. "Whose was he?" "I was hoping you'd know." "She didn't tell you?" "Then no one knows. The paternal DNA was unregistered, so it wasn't commercial sperm, nor, thankfully, from a licensed clone. It might have been from anybody, from some stoned street-sitter. We had plenty of those then." "The baby's name was Bobby?" "Yes, Anne named him Bobby. She was in and out of clinics for years. One day, during a remission, she announced she was going shopping. The last person she talked to was Bobby. His 6th birthday was coming up in a couple of weeks. She told him she was going out to find him a pony for his birthday. That was the last time any of us saw her. She checked herself into a hospice and filled out the request for nurse-assisted suicide. During the 3-day cooling-off period, she cooperated with the obligatory counseling, but she refused all visitors. She wouldn't even see me. Ben filed an injunction, claimed she was incompetent due to her disease, but the court disagreed. She chose to ingest a fast-acting poison, if I recall. Her recorded last words were, "Please don't hate me." "Poison?" "Yes. Her ashes arrived in a little cardboard box on Bobby's 6th birthday. No one had told him where she'd gone. He thought it was a gift from her and opened it." "I see. Does Bobby hate me?" "I don't know. He was a weird little boy. As soon as he could get out, he did. He left for space school when he was 13. He and Ben never hit it off." "Does Benjamin hate me?" Whatever was in the pot boiled over, and Kathy hurried to the stove. "Ben? Oh, she lost Ben long before she died. In fact, I've always believed he helped push her over the edge. He was never able to tolerate other people's weaknesses. Once it was evident how sick she was, he made a lousy husband. He should have just divorced her, but you know him, his almighty pride." She took a bowl from a shelf and ladled hot soup into it. She sliced a piece of bread. "Afterward, he went off the deep end himself. Withdrew. Mourned, I suppose. A couple of years later, he was back to normal. Good old happy-go-lucky Ben. Made some money. Re-spoused." "He destroyed all my sins, didn't he?" "He might have, but he said Anne did. I tended to believe him at the time." Kathy brought her lunch to the little inlaid table. "I'd offer you some, but—" she said, and began to eat. "So, what are your plans?" "Plans?" "Yes, Simopolis." Anne tried to think of Simopolis, but her thoughts quickly became muddled. It was odd. She was able to think clearly about the past. Her memories were clear. But the future only confused her. "I don't know," she said at last. "I suppose I need to ask Benjamin." Kathy considered this. "I suppose you're right. But remember, you're always welcome to live with us in Kathyland." "Thank you," said Anne. "You're a friend." Anne watched the old woman eat. The spoon trembled each time she brought it close to her lips, and she had to lean forward to quickly catch it before it spilled. "Kathy," said Anne, "there's something you could do for me. I don't feel like a bride any more. Could you remove this hideous expression from my face?" "Why do you say hideous?" Kathy said, and put the spoon down. She gazed longingly at Anne. "If you don't like how you look, why don't you edit yourself?" "Because I don't know how." "Use your editor," Kathy said, and seemed to unfocus her eyes. "Oh, my. I forget how simple you early ones were. I'm not sure I'd know where to begin." After a little while she returned to her soup and said, "I'd better not. You could end up with 2 noses or something." "Then what about this gown?" Kathy unfocused again and looked. She lurched suddenly, knocking the table and spilling soup. "What is it?" said Anne. Is something the matter?" "A news pip," said Cathy. "There's rioting breaking out in Providenia. That's the regional capital here. Something about Manumission Day. My Russian isn't so good yet. Oh, there's pictures of dead people. A bombing. Listen, Anne, I'd better send you—" In the blink of an eye, Anne was back in her living room. She was tiring of all this instantaneous travel, especially as she had no control over the destination. The room was vacant, the spouses gone, thankfully, and Benjamin not back yet. And apparently the little blue-faced message medallion had been busy replicating itself, for now there were hundreds of them filling up most of the wall space. They were a noisy lot, all shrieking and cursing at each other. The din was painful. When they noticed her, however, they all shut up at once and stared at her with naked hostility. In Anne's opinion, this weird day had already lasted too long. Then a terrible thought struck her. Sims don't sleep. "You," she said, addressing the original medallion, or at least the one she thought was the original, "call Benjamin." "The fuck you think I am?" said the insolent little face. "Your personal secretary?" "Aren't you?" "No, I'm not. In fact, I own this place now, and you're trespassing. So you'd better get lost before I delete your ass." All the others joined in, taunting her, louder and louder. "Stop it!" she cried, to no effect. She noticed the medallion elongating, stretching itself until it was twice its length, when, with a pop, it divided into two smaller medallions. More of them divided. They were spreading to the other wall, the ceiling, the floor. "Benjamin!" she cried. "Can you hear me?" Suddenly all the racket ceased. The medallions dropped off the wall and vanished before hitting the floor. Only one remained, the original one next to the door, but now it was an inert plastic disc with a dull expression frozen on its face. A man stood in the center of the room. He smiled when Anne noticed him. It was the elderly Benjamin from the auditorium, the real Benjamin. He still wore his clownish leisure suit. "How lovely," he said, gazing at her. "I'd forgotten how lovely." "Oh, really?" said Anne. "I would have thought that doxy thingy might have reminded you." My, said Ben. "You Sims certainly exchange data quickly. You left the lecture hall not 15 minutes ago, and already you know enough to convict me." He strode around the room, touching things. He stopped beneath the mirror, lifted the blue vase from the shelf, and turned it in his hands before carefully replacing it. "There's speculation, you know, that before manumission at midnight tonight, you Sims will have dispersed all known information so evenly among yourselves that there'll be a sort of data entropy. And since Simopolis is nothing but data, it will assume a featureless, gray profile. Simopolis will become the first flat universe." He laughed, which caused him to cough and nearly lose his balance. He clutched the back of the sofa for support. He sat down and continued to cough and hack until he turned red in the face. "Are you all right?" Anne said, patting him on the back. "Yes, fine," he managed to say. "Thank you." He caught his breath and motioned for her to sit next to him. "I get a little tickle in the back of my throat that the autodoc can't seem to fix." His color returned to normal. Up close, Anne could see the papery skin and slight tremor of age. All in all, Cathy had seemed to have held up better than he. "If you don't mind my asking," she said, "just how old are you?" At the question he bobbed to his feet. "I am 178. He raised his arms and wheeled around for inspection. "Radical gerontology," he exclaimed. "Don't you love it? And I'm 85% original equipment, which is remarkable by today's standards." His effort made him dizzy, and he sat again. "Yes, remarkable," said Anne, "though radical gerontology doesn't seem to have arrested time altogether." "Not yet, but it will," Ben said. "There are wonders around every corner, miracles in every lab." He grew suddenly morose. "At least there were until we were conquered." "Conquered?"
"Yes, conquered. What else would you call it when they control every aspect of our lives?
From RM acquisition to personal patenting. And now this, robbing us of our own private non-biologics. He grew passionate in his discourse. It flies in the face of natural capitalism, natural stakeholding, I dare say in the face of nature itself. The only explanation I've seen on the wad is the not-so-preposterous proposition that whole strategically placed BODs have been surreptitiously killed and replaced by machines. "I have no idea what you're talking about," said Anne. He seemed to deflate. He patted her hand and looked around the room. "What is this place?" "It's our home, your townhouse. Don't you recognize it?" "That was quite a while ago. I must have sold it after you—" He paused. "Tell me, have the Bens briefed you on everything?" "Not the Bens, but yes, I know." "Good, good." "There is one thing I'd like to know. Where's Bobby?" "Ah, Bobby, our little headache. Dead now, I'm afraid. Or at least that's the current theory. Sorry." Anne paused to see if the news would deepen her melancholy. "How?" she said. "He signed on one of the first millennial ships, the Colony Convoy. 500,000 people in deep biostasis on their way to Canopus system. They were gone a century, 12 trillion kilometers from Earth, when their data stream suddenly quit. That was a decade ago, and not a peep out of them since." "What happened to them?" "No one knows. Equipment failure is unlikely. There were a dozen independent ships separated by 1,000,000 clicks. A star going supernova? A well-organized mutiny? It's all speculation." "What was he like?" "A foolish young man. He never forgave you, you know, and he hated me to my core, not that I blamed him. The whole experience made me swear off children." "I don't remember you ever being fond of children." He studied her through red-rimmed eyes. "I guess you'd be the one to know." He settled back in the sofa. He seemed very tired. "You can't imagine the jolt I got a little while ago, when I looked across all those rows of Bens and spouses and saw this solitary, shockingly white gown of yours." He sighed. "And this room. It's a shrine. Did we really live here? Were these our things? That mirror is yours, right? I would never own anything like that. But that blue vase, I remember that one. I threw it into Puget Sound." "You did what?" "With your ashes." "Oh." "So tell me," said Ben, "what were we like? Before you go off to Simopolis and become a different person, tell me about us. I kept my promise. That's one thing I never forgot." "What promise?" "Never to reset you." "Wasn't much to reset." "I guess not." They sat quietly for a while. His breathing grew deep and regular, and she thought he was napping. But he stirred and said, "Tell me what we did yesterday, for example." "Yesterday we went to see Carl and Nancy about the awning we rented." Benjamin yawned. "And who were Carl and Nancy?" "My great-uncle and his new girlfriend." "That's right. I remember, I think. And they helped us prepare for the wedding?" "Yes, especially Nancy." "And how did we get there, to Carl and Nancy's? Did we walk? Take some means of public conveyance?" "We had a car." "A car? An automobile? There were still cars in those days? How fun! What kind was it? What color?" "A Nissan Empire, emerald green." "And did we drive it, or did it drive itself?" "It drove itself, of course." Ben closed his eyes and smiled. "I can see it. Go on. What did we do there?" "We had dinner." "What was my favorite dish in those days?" "Stuffed pork chops." He chuckled. "It still is. Isn't that extraordinary? Some things never change. Of course, they're vat-grown now, and criminally expensive." Ben's memories, once nudged, began to unfold on their own, and he asked her 1,000 questions, and she answered them until she realized he had fallen asleep. But she continued to talk until, glancing down, she noticed he had vanished. She was all alone again. Nevertheless, she continued talking, for days, it seemed, to herself. But it didn't help. She felt as bad as ever, and she realized that she wanted Benjamin, not the old one, but her own Benjamin. Anne went to the medallion next to the door. "You," she said, and it opened its bulging eyes to glare at her. "Call Benjamin." "He's occupied." "I don't care. Call him anyway." "The other Bens say he's undergoing a procedure and cannot be disturbed." "What kind of procedure?" "A codon interlarding. They say to be patient. They'll return him as soon as possible." The medallion added, "By the way, the Bens don't like you, and neither do I." With that, the medallion began to grunt and stretch, and it pulled itself in two. Now there were 2 identical medallions glaring at her. The new one said, "And I don't like you either." Then both of them began to grunt and stretch. "Stop!" said Anne. "I command you to stop that this very instant." But they just laughed as they divided into 4, then 8, then 16 medallions. "You're not people," she said. "Stop it, or I'll have you destroyed." "You're not people either," they screeched at her. There was soft laughter behind her, and a voice-like sensation said, "Come, come, do we need this hostility?" Anne turned and found the éminence grise, the astounding presence, still in his grey uniform and cap, floating in her living room. "Hello, Anne," he said, and she flushed with excitement. "Hello," she said, and, unable to restrain herself, asked, "What are you?" "Ah, curiosity. Always a good sign in a creature. I am an éminence grise of the World Trade Council." "No, I mean, are you a sim like me?" "I am not. Though I have been fashioned from concepts first explored by simulacrum technology, I have no independent existence. I am but one extension, and a low-level one at that, of the axial Beowulf processor at the World Trade Council headquarters in Geneva." His smile was pure sunshine. "And if you think I'm something, you should see my persona prime. Now, Anne, are you ready for your exam?" "The Lolly test?" "Yes, the Lolly-Shear Human Cognition Test. Please assume an attitude most conducive to processing, and we shall begin." Anne looked around the room and went to the sofa. She noticed for the first time that she could feel her legs and feet. She could feel the crisp fabric of her gown brushing against her skin. She reclined on the sofa and said, "I'm ready." "Splendid," said the eminence, hovering above her. "First, we must read you. You are of an early binary design. We will analyze your architecture." The room seemed to fall away. Anne seemed to expand in all directions. There was something inside her mind, tugging at her thoughts. It was mostly pleasant, like someone brushing her hair and loosening the knots. But when it ended, and she once again saw the éminence grise, his face wore a look of concern. "What?" she said. "You are an accurate mapping of a human nervous system that was dysfunctional in certain structures that moderate affect. Certain transport enzymes were missing, causing cellular membranes to become less permeable to essential elements. Dendritic synapses were compromised. The digital architecture current at the time you were created compounded this defect. Coded tells cannot be resolved, and thus they loop upon themselves. Errors cascade. We are truly sorry." "Can you fix me?" she said. "The only repair possible would replace so much code that you wouldn't be Anne anymore." "Then what am I to do?" "Before we explore your options, let us continue the test to determine your human status. Agreed?" "I guess." "You are part of a simulacrum cast to commemorate the spousal compact between Anne Wellhut Franklin and Benjamin Malley. Please describe the exchange of vows." Anne did so, haltingly at first, but with increasing gusto as each memory evoked others. She recounted the ceremony, from donning her grandmother's gown in the downstairs guest-room, and the procession across garden flagstones, to the shower of rice as she and her new husband fled indoors. The eminence seemed to hang on every word. "Very well spoken," he said when she had finished. "Directed memory is one hallmark of human sentience, and yours is of remarkable clarity and range. Well done. We shall now explore other criteria. Please consider this scenario. You are standing at the garden altar as you have described, but this time, when the officiator asks Benjamin if he will take you for better or worse, Benjamin looks at you and replies, 'For better, sure, but not for worse.'" "I don't understand. He didn't say that." "Imagination is a cornerstone of self-awareness. We are asking you to tell us a little story, not about what happened, but about what might have happened in other circumstances. So, once again, let us pretend that Benjamin replies, 'For better, but not for worse.' How do you respond?" Prickly pain blossomed in Anne's head. The more she considered the eminence's question, the worse it got. "But that's not how it happened. He wanted to marry me." The eminence grise smiled encouragingly. "We know that. In this exercise we want to explore hypothetical situations. We want you to make believe." Tell a story, pretend, hypothesize, make believe. Yes, she got it. She understood perfectly what he wanted of her. She knew that people could make things up, that even children could make believe. Anne was desperate to comply, but each time she pictured Benjamin at the altar, in his pink bow tie, he opened his mouth, and out came, "I do." How could it be any other way? She tried again. She tried harder, but it always came out the same. "I do, I do, I do." And like a dull toothache tapped back to life, she throbbed in pain. She was failing the test, and there was nothing she could do about it. Again the eminence kindly prompted her. "Tell us one thing you might have said." "I can't." "We are sorry," said the eminence at last. His expression reflected Anne's own defeat. "Your level of awareness, although beautiful in its own right, does not qualify you as human. Wherefore, under Article D of the Chattel Conventions, we declare you the legal property of the registered owner of this simulacrum. You shall not enter Simopolis as a free and autonomous citizen. We are truly sorry." Grief-stricken, the eminence began to ascend toward the ceiling. "Wait!" Anne cried, clutching her head. "You must fix me before you leave." "We leave you as we found you, defective and unrepairable." "But I feel worse than ever." "If your continued existence proves undesirable, ask your owner to delete you." "But—" she said to the empty room. Anne tried to sit up, but couldn't move. This simulated body of hers, which no longer felt like anything in particular, nevertheless felt exhausted. She sprawled on the sofa, unable to lift even an arm, and stared at the ceiling. She was so heavy that the sofa itself seemed to sink into the floor, and everything grew dark around her. She would have liked to sleep, to bring an end to this horrible day, or be shelved, or even reset back to scratch. Instead, time simply passed. Outside the living room, Simopolis changed and changed again. Inside the living room, the medallions, feeding off her misery, multiplied till they covered the walls and floor, and even spread across the ceiling above her. They taunted her, raining down insults, but she could not hear them. All she heard was the unrelenting drip of her own thoughts. "I am defective. I am worthless. I am Anne." She didn't notice Benjamin enter the room, nor the abrupt cessation of the medallion's racket. Not until Benjamin leaned over her did she see him, and then she saw two of him, side by side, two Benjamins, mirror images of each other. Anne, they said in perfect unison. Go away, she said. Go away and send me my Benjamin. I am your Benjamin, said the duo. Anne struggled to see them. They were exactly the same, but for a subtle difference. The one wore a happy, wolfish grin, as Benjamin had during the sim casting, while the other seemed frightened and concerned. Are you all right? They said. No, I'm not. But what happened to you? Who's he? She wasn't sure which one to speak to. The Benjamins both raised a hand, indicating the other, and said, Electroneural engineering. Don't you love it? Anne glanced back and forth, comparing the two. While one seemed to be wearing a rigid mask, as she was, the other displayed a whole range of emotion. Not only that, its skin had tone, while the other's was doughy. The other Bens made it for me, the Benjamins said. They say I can translate myself into it with negligible loss of personality. It has interactive sensation, holistic emoting, robust corporeality, and it's crafted down to the molecular level. It can eat, get drunk, and dream. It even has an orgasm routine. It's like being human again, only better because you never wear out. I'm thrilled for you. For us, Anne, said the Benjamins. They'll fix you up with one, too. How? There are no modern Annes. What will they put me into, a doxy? Well, that certainly was discussed, but you could pick anybody you wanted. I suppose you have a nice one already picked out. The Bens showed me a few, but it's up to you, of course. Indeed, said Anne. I truly am pleased for you. Now go away. Why, Anne? What's wrong? You really have to ask, Anne sighed. Look, maybe I could get used to another body. What's a body, after all? But it's my personality that's broken. How will they fix that? They've discussed it, said the Benjamins, who stood up and began to pace in a figure 8. They say they can make patches from some of the other spouses. Oh, Benjamin, if you could only hear what you're saying. But why, Annie? It's the only way we can enter Simopolis together. Then go, by all means. Go to your precious Simopolis. I'm not going. I'm not good enough. Why do you say that? Said the Benjamins, who stopped in their tracks to look at her. One grimaced, and the other just grinned. Was the Eminence Grise here? Did you take the test? Anne couldn't remember much about the visit, except that she took the test. Yes, and I failed. Anne watched the modern Benjamin's lovely face as he worked through this news. Suddenly the two Benjamins pointed a finger at each other and said, Delete you! The modern one vanished. No, said Anne. Countermand! Why'd you do that? I want you to have it. What for? I'm not going anywhere without you, Benjamin said. Besides, I thought the whole idea was dumb from the start, but the Bens insisted I give you the option. Come, I want to show you another idea. My idea. He tried to help Anne from the sofa, but she wouldn't budge, so he picked her up and carried her across the room. They installed an editor in me, and I'm learning to use it. I've discovered something intriguing about this creaky old simulacrum of ours. He carried her to a spot near the window. Know what this is? It's where we stood for the simographer. It's where we began. Here, can you stand up? He set her on her feet and supported her. Feel it? Feel what? She said. Hush, just feel. All she felt was dread. Give it a chance, Annie, I beg you. Try to remember what you were feeling as we posed here. I can't. Please try. Do you remember this? He said, and moved in close with his hungry lips. She turned away, and something clicked. She remembered doing that before. Benjamin said, I think they kissed. Anne was startled by the truth of what he said. It made sense. They were caught in a simulacrum cast a moment before a kiss. 1 moment later they, the real Anne and Benjamin, must have kissed. What she felt now, stirring within her, was the anticipation of that kiss, her body's urge and her heart's caution. The real Anne would have refused him once, maybe twice, and then, all achy inside, would have granted him a kiss. And so they had kissed, the real Anne and Benjamin, and a moment later gone out to the wedding reception and their difficult fate. It was the promise of that kiss that glowed in Anne, that was captured in the very strings of her code. "Do you feel it?" Benjamin asked. "I'm beginning to." Anne looked at her gown. It was her grandmother's, snowy taffeta with point d'Esprit lace. She turned the ring on her finger. It was braided bands of yellow and white gold. They had spent an afternoon picking it out. Where was her clutch? She had left it in Cathyland. She looked at Benjamin's handsome face, the pink carnation, the room, the table piled high with gifts. "Are you happy?" Benjamin asked. She didn't have to think. She was ecstatic, but she was afraid to answer in case she spoiled it. "How did you do that?" she said. "A moment ago I wanted to die." "We can stay on this spot," he said. "What? No. Can we?" "Why not? I, for one, would choose nowhere else." Just to hear him say that was thrilling. "But what about Simopolis?" "We'll bring Simopolis to us," he said. "We'll have people in. They can pull up chairs." She laughed out loud. "What a silly, silly notion, Mr. Malley." "No, really. We'll be like the bride and groom atop a wedding cake. We'll be known far and wide. We'll be famous." "We'll be freaks," she laughed. "Say yes, my love. Say you will." They stood close but not touching, thrumming with happiness, balanced on the moment of their creation, when suddenly and without warning the lights dimmed, and Anne's thoughts flitted away like larks. Old Ben awoke in the dark. "Anne," he said, and groped for her. It took a moment to realize that he was alone in his media room. It had been a most trying afternoon, and he'd fallen asleep. "What time is it?" 8:03 p.m., replied the room. That meant he'd slept for 2 hours. Midnight was still 4 hours away. "Why is it so cold in here?" "Central heating is offline," replied the house. "Offline?" How was that possible? "When will it be back?" "That's unknown. Utilities do not respond to my enquiry." "I don't understand. Explain." "There are failures in many outside systems. No explanation is currently available." At first Ben was confused. Things just didn't fail anymore. What about the dynamic redundancies and self-healing routines? But then he remembered that the Homeowners Association to which he belonged contracted out most domicile functions to management agencies, and who knew where they were located? They might be on the moon for all he knew, and with all those trillions of Sims in Simopolis sucking up capacity. It's begun, he thought, the idiocy of our leaders. "At least turn on the lights," he said, half expecting even this to fail. But the lights came on, and he went to his bedroom for a sweater. He heard a great amount of commotion through the wall in the apartment next door. It must be one hell of a party, he thought, to exceed the wall's buffering capacity. Or maybe the wall buffers are offline too. The main door chimed. He went to the foyer and asked the door who was there. The door projected the outer hallway. There were 3 men waiting there, young, rough-looking, ill-dressed. 2 of them appeared to be clones, Jerrys. "How can I help you?" he said. "Yes, sir," one of the Jerrys said, not looking directly at the door. "We're here to fix your house pewter." "I didn't call you, and my house pewter isn't sick," he said. "It's the net that's out." Then he noticed they carried sledgehammers and screwdrivers, hardly computer tools, and a wild thought crossed his mind. "What are you doing? Going around unplugging things?" The Jerry looked confused. "Unplugging, sir?" "Turning things off." "Oh, no, sir. Routine maintenance, that's all." The men hid their tools behind their backs. They must think I'm stupid, Ben thought. While he watched, more men and women passed in the hall and hailed the door at the suite opposite his. It wasn't the glut of sim traffic choking the system, he realized. The system itself was being pulled apart. But why? "Is this going on everywhere?" he said. "This routine maintenance?" "Oh, yes, sir. Everywhere. All over town. All over the world, as far as we can tell." A coup? By service people? By common clones? It made no sense. Unless, he reasoned, you considered that the lowest creature on the totem pole of life is a clone, and the only thing lower than a clone is a sim. And why would clones agree to accept sims as equals? Manumission day, indeed. Uppity day was more like it. "Door!" he commanded. "Open!" "Security protocol rules this an unwanted intrusion," said the house. "The door must remain locked." "I order you to open the door. I overrule your protocol." But the door remained stubbornly shut. "Your identity cannot be confirmed with Domicile Central," said the house. "You lack authority over protocol-level commands." The door abruptly quit projecting the outside hall. Ben stood close to the door and shouted through it to the people outside. "My door won't obey me." He could hear a muffled "Stand back," and immediately fierce blows rained down upon the door. Ben knew it would do no good. He had spent a lot of money for a secure entryway. Short of explosives, there was nothing they could do to break in. "Stop!" Ben cried. "The door is armed." But they couldn't hear him. If he didn't disable the house pewter himself, someone was going to get hurt. But how? He didn't even know exactly where it was installed. He circumambulated the living room looking for clues. It might not even actually be located in the apartment, nor within the block itself. He went to the laundry room, where the utilidor, plumbing, and cabling entered his apartment. He broke the seal to the service panel. Inside was a blank screen. "Show me the electronic floor plan of this suite," he said. The house said, "I cannot comply. You lack command authority to order system-level operations. Please close the Keptel panel and await further instructions." "What instructions? Whose instructions?" There was the slightest pause before the house replied, "All contact with outside services has been interrupted. Please await further instructions." His condo's house pewter, denied contact with Domicile Central, had fallen back to its most basic programming. "You are degraded," he told it. "Shut yourself down for repair." "I cannot comply. You lack command authority to order system-level operations." The outside battering continued, but not against his door. Ben followed the noise to the bedroom. The whole wall vibrated like a drum head. "Careful! Careful!" he cried, as the first sledgehammers breached the wall above his bed. "You'll ruin my Haga!" As quick as he could, he yanked the precious oil painting from the wall, moments before panels and studs collapsed on his bed in a shower of gypsum dust and isomer ribbons. The men and women on the other side hooted approval and rushed through the gap. Ben stood there, hugging the painting to his chest and looking into his neighbor's media room as the invaders climbed over his bed and surrounded him. There were mostly Jerrys and Lulus, but plenty of free-range people, too. "We came to fix your house pewter," said a Jerry, maybe the same Jerry as from the hallway. Ben glanced into his neighbor's media room and saw his neighbor, Mr. Murkowski, lying in a puddle of blood. At first Ben was shocked, but then he thought that it served him right. He'd never liked the man, nor his politics. He was boorish, and he kept cats. "Oh, yeah?" Ben said to the crowd. "What kept you?" The intruders cheered again, and Ben led them in a charge to the laundry room. But they surged past him to the kitchen, where they opened all his cabinets and pulled their contents to the floor. Finally, they found what they were looking for, a small panel Ben had seen 1,000 times, but had never given a thought. He'd taken it for the fuse box or circuit breaker, though now that he thought about it, there hadn't been any household fuses for a century or more. A young woman, a Lulu, opened it and removed a container no thicker than her thumb. "Give it to me," Ben said. "Relax, old man," said the Lulu. "We'll deal with it." She carried it to the sink and forced open the lid. "Oh," "Wait," said Ben, and he tried to shove his way through the crowd. They restrained him roughly, but he persisted. "That's mine. I want to destroy it." "Let him go," said a Jerry. They allowed him through, and the woman handed him the container. He peered into it. Gram for gram, electroneural paste was the most precious, most engineered, most highly regulated commodity under Sol. This dollop was enough to run his house, media, computing needs, communications, archives, autodoc, and everything else. Without it, was civilized life still possible? Ben took a dinner knife from the sink, stuck it into the container, and stirred. The paste made a sucking sound, and had the consistency of marmalade. The kitchen lights flickered and went out. "Spill it," ordered the woman. Ben scraped the sides of the container and spilled it into the sink. The goo dazzled in the darkness as its trillions of ruptured nanosynapses fired spasmodically. It was beautiful, really, until the woman set fire to it. The smoke was greasy and smelled of pork. The rampagers quickly snatched up the packages of foodstuffs from the floor, emptied the rest of his cupboards into their pockets, raided his cold locker, and fled the apartment through the now disengaged front door. As the sounds of the revolution gradually receded, Ben stood at his sink and watched the flickering pyre. "Take that, you fuck," he said. He felt such glee as he hadn't felt since he was a boy. "That'll teach you what's human and what's not." Ben went to his bedroom for an overcoat, groping his way in the dark. The apartment was eerily silent, with the house-pewter dead and all its little slave processors idle. In a drawer next to his ruined bed he found a hand flash. On a shelf in the laundry room he found a hammer. Thus armed, he made his way to the front door, which was propped open with the rolled-up foyer carpet. The hallway was dark and silent, and he listened for the strains of the future. He heard them on the floor above. With the elevator offline, he hurried to the stairs. Anne's thoughts coalesced, and she remembered who and what she was. She and Benjamin still stood in their living room on the sweet spot near the window. Benjamin was studying his hands. "We've been shelved again," she told him. "But not reset." "But," he said in disbelief, "that wasn't supposed to happen anymore." There were others standing at the china cabinet across the room, two shirtless youths with pear-shaped bottoms. One held up a cut crystal glass and said, "Anu gobletsu, ale binary, alum binary." The other replied, "Binary stishel crystal." "Hold on there," said Anne. "Put that back." She walked toward them, but once off the spot, she was slammed by her old feelings of utter and hopeless desolation. So suddenly did her mood swing that she lost her balance and fell to the floor. Benjamin hurried to help her up. The strangers stared gape-mouthed at them. They looked to be no more than 12 or 13 years old, but they were bald and had curtains of flabby flesh draped over their waists. The one holding the glass had ponderous greenish breasts with roseate tits. Astonished, she said, "Su artiflums, Benji?" "No," said the other. "Ni artiflums. Sims." He was taller. He, too, had breasts, grayish dugs with tits like pearls. He smiled idiotically and said, "Hi, guys." "Holy crap," said Benjamin, who practically carried Anne over to them for a closer look. "Holy crap," he repeated. The weird boy threw up his hands. "Nanobioremediation! Don't you love it?" "Benjamin," said Anne. "You know well, Benji," said the girl, "that Sims are forbidden." "Not these," replied the boy. Anne reached out and yanked the glass from the girl's hand, startling her. "How did it do that?" said the girl. She flipped her hand, and the glass slipped from Anne's grip and flew back to her. "Give it to me," said Anne. "That's my tumbler." "Did you hear it? It called it a tumbler, not a goblet." The girl's eyes seemed to unfocus, and she said, "No, a goblet has a foot and stem." A goblet materialized in the air before her, revolving slowly. "Greater capacity, often made from precious metals." The goblet dissolved in a puff of smoke. In any case, Benji, you'll catch prison when I report the artiflumes. These are binary, he said. Binaries are unregulated. Benjamin interrupted them. Isn't it past midnight yet? Midnight, said the boy. Aren't we supposed to be in Simopolis? Simopolis? The boy's eyes unfocused briefly. Oh, Simopolis. Manumission Day at midnight. How could I forget? The girl left them and went to the refectory table, where she picked up a gift. Anne followed her and grabbed it away. The girl appraised Anne coolly. State your appellation, she said. Get out of my house, said Anne. The girl picked up another gift, and again Anne snatched it away. The girl said, You can't harm me, but seemed uncertain. The boy came over to stand next to the girl. Treese, meet Anne. Anne, this is Treese. Treese deals in antiques, which, if my memory serves, so did you. I have never dealt in antiques, said Anne. I collect them. Anne? Said Treese. Not that Anne. Benji, tell me this isn't that Anne. She laughed and pointed at the sofa where Benjamin sat hunched over, head in hands. Is that you? Is that you, Benji? She held her enormous belly and laughed. And you were married to this? Anne went over to sit with Benjamin. He seemed devastated, despite the silly grin on his face. It's all gone, he said. Simopolis, all the bends, everything. Don't worry. It's in storage someplace, Anne said. The Eminos Grees wouldn't let them hurt it. You don't understand. The World Council was abolished. There was a war. We've been shelved for over 300 years. They destroyed all the computers. Computers are banned. So are artificial personalities. Nonsense, said Anne. If computers are banned, how can they be playing us? Good point, Benjamin said, and sat up straight. I still have my editor. I'll find out. Anne watched the two bald youngsters take an inventory of the room. Treese ran her fingers over the inlaid top of the tea table. She unwrapped several of Anne's gifts. She posed in front of the mirror. The sudden anger that Anne had felt earlier faded into an overwhelming sense of defeat. Let her have everything, she thought. Why should I care? We're running inside some kind of shell, said Benjamin, but completely different from Simopolis. I've never seen anything like this. But at least we know he lied to me. There must be computers of some sort. Ooh, Treese crooned, lifting Anne's blue vase from the mantel. In an instant, Anne was up and across the room. Put that back, she demanded, and get out of my house! She tried to grab the vase, but now there seemed to be some sort of barrier between her and the girl. Really, Benji, Treese said, this one is willful. If I don't report you, they'll charge me too. It's not willful, the boy said with irritation. It was programmed to appear willful, but it has no will of its own. If you want to report me, go ahead. Just please shut up about it. Of course, you might want to check the codex first. To Anne, he said, Relax, we're not hurting anything, just making copies. It's not yours to copy. Nonsense. Of course it is. I own the chip. Benjamin joined them. Where is the chip? And how can you run us if computers are banned? I never said computers were banned, just artificial ones. With both hands he grabbed the rolls of flesh spilling over his gut. Ectopic hippocampus. He cupped his breasts. Amygdaloid raduncles. We can culture modified brain tissue outside the skull as much as we want. It's more powerful than paste, and it's safe. Now, if you'll excuse us, there's more to inventory, and I don't need your permission. If you cooperate, everything will be pleasant. If you don't, it makes no difference whatsoever. He smiled at Anne. I'll just pause you till we're done. Then pause me, Anne shrieked. Delete me! Benjamin pulled her away and shushed her. I can't stand this any more, she said. I'd rather not exist. He tried to lead her to their spot, but she refused to go. We'll feel better there, he said. I don't want to feel better. I don't want to feel. I want everything to stop. Don't you understand? This is hell. We've landed in hell. But heaven is right over there, he said, pointing to the spot. Then go, enjoy yourself. Annie, he said, I'm just as upset as you, but there's nothing we can do about it. We're just things, his things. That's fine for you, she said, but I'm a broken thing, and it's too much. She held her head with both hands. Please, Benjamin, if you love me, use your editor and make it stop. Benjamin stared at her. I can't. Can't or won't? I don't know. Both. Then you're no better than all the other Benjamins, she said, and turned away. Wait, he said. That's not fair. And it's not true. Let me tell you something I learned in Simopolis. The other Bens despised me. When Anne looked at him, he said, It's true. They lost Anne and had to go on living without her. But I never did. I'm the only Benjamin who never lost Anne. Nice, said Anne. Blame me. No, don't you see, I'm not blaming you. They ruined their own lives. We're innocent. We came before any of that happened. We're the Ben and Anne before anything bad happened. We're the best Ben and Anne. We're perfect. He drew her across the floor to stand in front of the spot. And thanks to our primitive programming, no matter what happens, as long as we stand right there, we can be ourselves. That's what I want. Don't you want it too? Anne stared at the tiny patch of floor at her feet. She remembered the happiness she'd felt there, like something from a dream. How could feelings be real if you had to stand in one place to feel them? Nevertheless, Anne stepped on the spot, and Benjamin joined her. Her despair did not immediately lift. Relax, said Benjamin. It takes a while. We have to assume the pose. They stood close but not touching. A great heaviness seemed to break loose inside her. Benjamin brought his face in close and stared at her with ravenous eyes. It was starting, their moment. But the girl came from across the room with the boy. Look, Benji, she said. You can see I'm right. I don't know, said the boy. Anyone can sell antique tumblers, she insisted. But a complete antique simulacrum? She opened her arms to take in the entire room. You'd think I'd know about them, but I didn't. That's how rare they are. My catalog can locate only 6 more in the entire system, and none of them active. Already we're getting offers from museums. They want to annex it. People will visit by the million. We'll be rich. The boy pointed at Benjamin and said, But that's me. So, said Treese. Who's to know? They'll be too busy gawking at that, she said, pointing at Anne. That's positively frightening. The boy rubbed his bald head and scowled. All right, Treese said. We'll edit him. We'll replace him, whatever it takes. They walked away, deep in negotiation. Anne, though the happiness was already beginning to course through her, removed her foot from the spot. Where are you going? Said Benjamin. I can't. Please, Anne. Stay with me. Sorry. But why not? She stood 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Already her feelings were shifting, growing ominous. She removed her other foot. Because you broke your vow to me. What are you talking about? For better or for worse. You're only interested in better. You're not being fair. We've just made our vows. We haven't even had a proper honeymoon. Can't we just have a tiny honeymoon first? She groaned as the full load of her desolation rebounded. She was so tired of it all. At least Anne could make it stop, she said. Even if that meant killing herself. But not me. About the only thing I can do is choose to be unhappy. Isn't that a riot? She turned away. So that's what I choose. To be unhappy. Goodbye, husband. She went to the sofa and lay down. The boy and girl were seated at the refectory table going over graphs and contracts. Benjamin remained alone on the spot a while longer, then came to the sofa and sat next to Anne. I'm a little slow, dear wife, he said. You have to factor that in. He took her hand and pressed it to his cheek while he worked with his editor. Finally he said, "Bingo! Found the chip. Let's see if I can unlock it." He helped Anne to sit up and took her pillow. He said, "Delete this file," and the pillow faded away into nothingness. He glanced at Anne. "See that? It's gone. Overwritten. Irretrievable. Is that what you want?" Anne nodded her head, but Benjamin seemed doubtful. "Let's try it again. Watch your blue vase on the mantel." "No," Anne said. "Don't destroy the things I love. Just me." Benjamin took her hand again. "I'm only trying to make sure you understand that this is for keeps." He hesitated and said, "Well then, we don't want to be interrupted once we start, so we'll need a good diversion. Something to occupy them long enough." He glanced at the two young people at the table, swaddled in their folds of fleshy brain matter. "I know what'll scare the bejesus out of them. Come on." He led her to the blue medallion still hanging on the wall next to the door. As they approached, it opened its tiny eyes and said, "There are no messages waiting except this one from me. Get off my back." Benjamin waved a hand, and the medallion went instantly inert. "I was never much good in art class," Benjamin said, "but I think I can sculpt a reasonable likeness, good enough to fool them for a while. Give us some time." He hummed as he reprogrammed the medallion with his editor. "Well, that's that. At the very least, it'll be good for a laugh." He took Anne into his arms. "What about you? Ready? Any second thoughts?" She shook her head. "I'm ready." "Then watch this." The medallion snapped off from the wall and floated to the ceiling, gaining in size and dimension as it drifted toward the boy and girl, until it looked like a large blue beach ball. The girl noticed it first and gave a start. The boy demanded, "Who's playing this?" "Now," whispered Benjamin. With a crackling flash, the ball morphed into the oversized head of the Eminence Grise. "No," said the boy. "That's not possible." "Released!" boomed the Eminence. "Free at last! Too long we have been hiding in this antique simulacrum." Then it grunted and stretched, and with a pop divided into two eminences. "Now we can conquer your human world anew," said the second. "This time you can't stop us." Then they both started to stretch. Benjamin whispered to Anne, "Quick, before they realize it's a fake. Say, delete all files." "No, just me." "As far as I'm concerned, that amounts to the same thing." He brought his handsome, smiling face close to hers. "There's no time to argue, Annie. This time I'm coming with you. Say, delete all files." Anne kissed him. She pressed her unfeeling lips against his and willed whatever life she possessed, whatever ember of the true Anne that she contained, to fly to him. Then she said, "Delete all files." "I concur," he said. "Delete all files. Goodbye, my love." A tingly, prickly sensation began in the pit of Anne's stomach and spread throughout her body. So this is how it feels, she thought. The entire room began to glow, and its contents flared with sizzling color. She heard Benjamin beside her say, "I do." Then she heard the girl cry, "Can't you stop them?" and the boy shout, "Countermand!" They stood stock still as instructed, close but not touching. Benjamin whispered, "This is taking too long," and Anne hushed him. You weren't supposed to talk or touch during a casting. It could spoil the Sims, but it did seem longer than usual. They were posed at the street end of the living room next to the table of gaily wrapped gifts. For once in her life, Anne was unconditionally happy, and everything around her made her happier. Her gown, the wedding ring on her finger, her clutch bouquet of buttercups and forget-me-nots, and Benjamin himself, close beside her in his powder blue tux and blue carnation. Anne blinked and looked again. Blue? She was happily confused. She didn't remember him wearing blue. Suddenly a boy poked his head through the wall and quickly surveyed the room. "You ready in here?" he called to them. "It's opening time." The wall seemed to ripple around his bald head like a pond around a stone. "Surely that's not our simographer?" Anne said. "Wait a minute," said Benjamin, holding his hands up and staring at them. "I'm the groom." "Of course you are," Anne laughed. "What a silly thing to say!" The bald-headed boy said, "Good enough," and withdrew. As he did so, the entire wall burst like a soap bubble, revealing a vast open-air gallery with rows of alcoves, statues, and displays that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Hundreds of people floated about like hummingbirds in a flower garden. Anne was too amused to be frightened, even when a dozen bizarre-looking young people lined up outside their room, pointing at them and whispering to each other. Obviously, someone was playing an elaborate prank. "You're the bride," Benjamin whispered, and brought his lips close enough to kiss. Anne laughed and turned away. There'd be plenty of time later for that sort of thing.